Hello everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture. And how are we all doing? How are we all coping without new episodes of Doctor Who every week? Are we all okay? I hope so. But fear not, because I do have some more details to talk to you about, so that all is not lost. We have had a new edition of SFX magazine released, and there are a few tidbits in that edition that I think we should talk about. Now, as usual, I'm only going to be talking about a few very vague details from this edition of the magazine, and if you do want the full interviews, the full scoop, then please do go and get your hands on a copy of SFX magazine, and there is a link down below, so go get it. So the first story that I want to talk about is actually all about Rogue, which is one of my personal favourite episodes of the season. In particular, it pertains to the scene where the Doctor does his big kind of I am the Doctor speech, and we get the disembodied floating heads of each previous incarnation of the Doctor. So for those of you who are unaware, one of the Doctors that was in that lineup was actually played by Richard E. Grant, who you'll probably know from films like With Nail and I, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, and he also played the Great Intelligence in Series 7 of Doctor Who. But aside from all of those, Richard E. Grant also played the original 9th Doctor in the animated story Scream of the Shalka. Now this was before the 2005 revival, but then when the revival did come, Christopher Eccleston became the 9th Doctor, and Scream of the Shalka basically just got swept under the rug and no one really spoke about it, and a bit of erasure for Richard E. Grant's 9th Doctor. So now we have Richard E. Grant's Shalka Doctor appearing in Rogue. And not only has Russell T Davies reiterated that this is in fact the Shalka Doctor, because Richard E. Grant also played another version of the Doctor in Stephen Moffat's 1999 sketch, The Curse of Fatal Death. So some people might have speculated that this might have been this version of the Doctor, but no, Russell T Davies has confirmed that it is the Shalka Doctor. But he also actually explained how this happened and what it means. So basically, it all comes down to our favourite thing once again, that thing we all absolutely love, the Timeless Child. So this is what Russell T Davies said about it. Sometimes these things online are taken very seriously, but most people just burst out laughing. It doesn't presage anything. It's not the return of the Shalka Doctor. Or is it the Curse of Fatal Death Doctor? I don't know. It's the Shalka Doctor to me, I'll be honest. The door's open now thanks to the Timeless Child, and you can come in and own your Doctor again. Basically, in other words, this isn't a teasing of a grand return of Richard E. Grant's Shalka Doctor. Basically, it was just a bit of fun. It was just because he could, basically. But when it comes down to it, the Timeless Child arc has now opened a door for us to be able to say, well, why couldn't there be a Richard E. Grant version of the Doctor out there somewhere? Really, at this point, there could be any versions of the Doctor anywhere. So here's the thing about the Timeless Child arc. I know we talk about it a lot, but it seems that it is still a very relevant thing. When it was first announced, I wasn't so sure about it, but upon reflection, the more I thought about it, the more I kind of come to the thought process of, the thing I didn't like about it was the suggestion that the Doctor wasn't a Time Lord. The Doctor was from some unknown world. That was the part of it that I didn't really get on board with and I'm not so sure about. But actually, when you think about the other side of it, the fact that there are other incarnations of the Doctor out there, why can't there be? I mean, the thing is, as soon as the War Doctor was introduced, that kind of threw this whole question in the air anyway. It stands to reason that there might be other incarnations. I think the thing that maybe made it a little more confusing was the fact that the Doctor, the 13th Doctor, didn't recognise the Fugitive Doctor. And then the suggestion that the Fugitive Doctor was actually a prior Doctor to William Hartnell, and so then the question was, why didn't 13 recognise her? Whereas if the Fugitive Doctor had turned out to be a future version of the Doctor, I mean, that would have worked. But in general, the idea that there are lost incarnations for various reasons, or multiple versions, or alternate versions, I think that makes sense. I think I can get on board with that. And the fact that it allows for the Doctors in expanded media who might not have been considered canon prior can now have their moment to shine, such as Richard E. Grant. Why can't we acknowledge that he was a part of Doctor Who lore? It makes sense. It doesn't really change anything that much. It just means, oh, well, in an alternate reality, this was a Doctor. Or, you know, there are versions of the Doctor out there that we haven't met yet, such as the War Doctor prior to that. So I don't take issue with it. I like that we now have recognition of these other versions of the character. I don't want them to go too far with it. I don't want them to get too crazy. Less is more, I think, in this instance. And if you take it too far, it kind of loses that power anymore. And it's just kind of like, oh, well, I see why you did that. The kind of basic numbering system does help us follow the kind of timeline of the show. You don't want to mess with that too much, but I don't take any issue with a little nod here and there to just acknowledge that some versions of the character who haven't really had much recognition can be brought into canon. I mean, the thing is, I don't think anyone seriously expected anything to come out of this little cameo, but it is nice to have confirmation that it was just a bit of fun. It was a way to just bring this forgotten Doctor into the canon of the show, and nice to know that he's still thought about and remembered. So the other little tidbit that I want to talk about revolves around 73 yards. Now, I did enjoy 73 yards. If you haven't already, make sure you do check out my ups and downs for that episode. My God, it feels like such a long time ago since I watched that episode. So much has happened since then. But it is an episode that did leave me feeling quite confused at the end. So the woman was Ruby all along. An older version of Ruby, right? Okay. But then I was still left with all these questions like, how does old Ruby then travel back in time at the end of the episode when she dies? If that is actually what happened, I mean, this is what I mean. I'm still a bit confused. And then how did she suddenly have the power to like scare people to run away from Ruby all of the time? And also the always standing 73 yards away, like she's not standing there with a tape measure. How does she have the power to do that? Why did the Doctor suddenly disappear? There were just a lot of questions left at the end of this episode, and questions that I don't feel like we really got any hint of an answer to. So in this edition of SFX magazine, Russell T Davies actually touched upon this mystery and actually revealed that the lack of an explanation was 100% intentional, because he wanted people basically to talk about it and come up with their own answers. So this is what he said about it. It doesn't remotely bother me that the woman in 73 yards doesn't get fully explained. I know exactly what's going on, and I haven't seen anyone else guess what's going on, but it's actually very clear what's going on. But that's creative. Let people be talking about it for years to come. Now the thing is, I think for this particular episode, a certain level of ambiguity is acceptable. Okay, it is meant to be mysterious, it is meant to be unsettling, and you're kind of meant to forge your own interpretations as to what's going on. At the same time, I do think that the ambiguity in this case was maybe a little bit more frustrating than it was interesting. It wasn't executed as well as episodes such as Midnight were, surrounding the mystery of that Midnight entity. It didn't matter that we didn't know what that entity looked like, and in that instance, drawing your own conclusions lent itself to the story, whereas with this one, I still felt confused and like I didn't have enough information to even draw a conclusion myself. If you think about Inception, for example, which is one of Danny's very favourite films, so he'll be very glad that we get to talk about it in this video. But the rules of the totems in that film, the spinning top and things like that, the consequences of going deeper and deeper into your dreams, they're all perfectly set up and explained, so then when we do get that final shot at the end of the episode, even though it's left ambiguous, you have all the information to understand exactly what it means and draw your own conclusion from it. The problem with 73 yards is that those rules weren't all made so clear to us. So then you are left asking those fundamental questions without the information needed to actually devise an answer. Also, I find it very interesting that in that quote, Russell T Davies said it's actually very clear what's going on. Is it though? Is it really? Some parts of it were clear. Okay, yep, sure, I'll give you that. The woman always stands 73 yards away. She was blurry on cameras and the things like that. That all makes sense. I can get behind that part of it. But I ask you again, how did old Ruby travel back in time when she dies to end up stood on the hill? That I still don't understand. How did she suddenly gain all these powers to make people just run away? Now, if he's talking about those kinds of questions, then they're not clear. I don't know the answers. Because again, I don't think the episode actually provided enough information for us to devise an answer. The thing is with 73 yards, when I first watched it, I ended it quite confused. I then rewatched it a couple of weeks later when I got back off of my holiday, and I will say that on second viewing, I did appreciate the episode as a whole much more. I think on first viewing, I wasn't so sure about the fact that we had a Dr. Light episode so early on, and you'll know from my season 1 ups and downs overall that I didn't massively feel that connected to Ruby as a character, and so the idea of being left with just Ruby for an entire episode and not having the Doctor there, I think did maybe taint it a little bit for me on first viewing, and that was playing in my mind as opposed to really focusing on the story itself. more thinking, oh, where's the Doctor? I want the Doctor to come back. When I watched it a second time, I definitely had a much bigger appreciation for Ruby's storyline as a whole in that episode. I think it was very, very good. I liked the way it kind of played with your mind. All of those parts of the story, I think, worked really, really well. But I still, even on second viewing, ended the episode going, what? Still don't get it. And the more I try to think about it and try to come up with an answer, the more confused I end up getting. And again, that stems back to this idea of we're not given enough information to draw that conclusion. It's not like Inception, for example, as I just mentioned, where you have all the information, you piece it together and devise your own answer. There's not enough information given here for me to actually piece everything together. Yeah, and I don't know how I feel about Russell's approach to this. This idea that let's just string people along and dangle all these mysteries that actually aren't as deep as everyone expects. It is like he's taunting us, but I feel like he needs to be careful because at this point he's just saying, well, I know what it means. I know what I'm doing and it's up to you whether you want to work that out or not. But if you're teasing us to try and get an answer and there's not enough for us to get an answer, or the answer is not satisfying, you're treading a fine line here where you might lose the faith in your viewers if you keep playing with them like that and intending not to fulfill their desire to have answers. Does that make sense? I just feel like, be careful. Russell is very aware of the online presence, of the speculation mill, of the nature of how things work now compared to how things would have worked back when he was showrunner the first time. You know, he's using that to his advantage in a way, but don't keep teasing your audience and not paying off with things. Because as he's literally stated here, he kind of did it on purpose. Maybe it works once. Don't keep doing it, please. And as I said at the beginning of the video, if you haven't already got a copy of this latest edition of SFX magazine, then make sure that you do go and get one. There's plenty of little tidbits, lots of interviews and insights into this first new season of Doctor Who, so do grab a copy. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.